Hi everybody, I'm Alexander Zeitlin and this is the Lockdown Lecture Series for Intermediate Violin, adapted from the Alias Music Foundations course, adapted for the classroom sitting. Let's jump into Lesson 1. So, I want to talk a little bit about the prerequisites. So to be able to handle this course, you should fairly comfortably be playing in third position. And you should also fairly comfortably be introduced to at least some basic right hand articulation. You should be able to do some things off the string with the bow hand. And if you have some introduction to vibrato, that would be very helpful, although I will be going over vibrato from the basics. So this isn't a from scratch intermediate course. There are some things that the course doesn't cover, but I would recommend, if you have questions about those things, ask your classroom teacher or your private teacher. Get caught up as quick as you can, and let's jump into it. So I'd also like to introduce the music we are working on. This is a series of pieces written by my father, who is a composer, teacher, and artist and painter. He is sort of comes from the Russian background, came from the Moscow Conservatory, and has taught for many, many decades. And after many years of teaching, kind of realized at the beginning, like the way violin music and string music is taught with simple but not very expressive repertoire. And so he wrote a series of pieces that essentially captured like the essential techniques that you would need to play, but through very, very expressive pieces that tell a story. And they're really fun to play. And he actually had them narrated and illustrated them and sort of painted the illustrations for them himself. I have reduced them to essentially just the pieces themselves without the interludes for the purposes of the class. It's a little bit of a rough edition, so we'll do our best with fingerings and things like that. But I will put a link in the description to the full recording. I highly suggest you go check it out. All right, so let's jump into it. When you are tackling intermediate repertoire, one of the things that I like to see intermediate students do is start to be able to handle the accuracy work. In other words, the just learning notes and kind of the basics of the music, as well as your foundational quality work, just making sure you're playing with good sound by yourself. So we'll be learning how to do that, as we'll also be learning how to use special drilling techniques to sort of increase the technical level of your playing. So to approach intermediate music, I like to think of our work in 3 stages. There's the accuracy stage, the quality stage, and then finally the shaping stage. So for the accuracy stage, this includes things that are sort of non-flexible. Things like notes, rhythm and bowings, metronome accuracy, and then memorization. Essentially, these are the kinds of things that if you were to ask, well, did you learn all the notes? Did you learn? There's no, all the rhythm and bowings. There's no sort of answer. It's yes or no. It's kind of like math. There's only one correct answer. The quality side, on the other hand, there could be many correct answers. We sort of approach our quality work the way we would approach literature. As long as we have a well-defended and well-expressed idea, we might have a variety of sounds that are good, and we can choose one that expresses what we want. So let's take a look at the elements of quality, and generally those would be things like intonation is first. I put intonation first. Some people think like, well, isn't intonation like a right and wrong thing? And no, it's not. There are different ways to approach intonation and different kinds of intonation. Actually, the more advanced you get, the more you learn about those. The next thing is sound and articulation. So sound and articulation. The Next thing after that will be our vibrato. And then lastly, we have our basically our visual presentation or our movement. And shaping is something we will get to. Essentially, like what you probably notice is as a beginner, you didn't get to spend much time in the shaping portion. You know, you spend most of your time learning the notes, getting corrected on quality, and a little bit just before you would play in a recital or something, you'd work on some shaping. The more you guys as students can do these two things on your own, the more your teacher, you know, in class, you'll be able to refine this quickly, and you will get to this, and this is where it gets really fun, and we'll see that in this course as well. So just a couple notes about how to work on these things and, you know, the fine points of each of these individual elements. So if I were to take any piece of music, you know, and I want to make sure that all my playing is accurate first before I go on the quality, I will start to just make sure I know my notes. So here we're going to jump in to the violin music here. And now I'm going to sort of break my music up into sections. That will give us sections to work on because we want to take our work in bite-sized chunks. It's funny how our minds work when we deal with the amount of work we have to do. If I were to take the entire first movement, which goes all the way down to here, and I were to say, okay, to play this, you will have to, you know, go over it like 30 times, like 30 repetitions, and I think you'll have it. To go, I gotta play all of this 30 times is exhausting. You know, your mind just will not be able to grab all of it. For you to take 4 bars is really not that much. It's fairly short. You know, you could repeat it 30 times, and then this 30 times. And overall, if you play the whole thing 30 times, you'll see you don't make much progress. But if you take it in smaller bites, you will make a ton of progress, and it will actually feel easy. So that's kind of what we want to do. So I have my first section here. The first thing I would want to do is I would want to make sure I know all the notes. You know, I didn't miss any sharps, didn't miss any you know, accidentals or fingerings especially. I'm going to make sure I'm shifting in the right places. So I'm going to grab my violin, and the best way to do this is to just play all separate bows. No slurs, just all long bows, making sure every note, you can kind of a little bit start to pay attention to intonation as well. So I'm just going to play through it once. I shift up to 3rd position here to make sure my 2nd finger is here. Half step to F. Down to what looks like 2nd position, but it's just a higher 1st finger. And then back to C sharp. So if you want to play along, here it is, just the notes. So once you've done that enough times where you don't stumble, you don't pause, you feel like you kind of just go straight comfortably through the notes, you can go on to the next step. So the next step, I want to take a look at my rhythm and bowings. Now, notice, you know, we're working on our rhythm, but the metronome work is in the next step. I just want to be aware of the rhythm. You know, I want to be aware of you know, longer and shorter notes. I want to just coordinate it. Now I've put all the slurs in. So when I look at the music, I see now that, okay, I've got a 3-note slur, a 3-note slur, a short 2-note slur. Maybe I might have to use my bow quickly through this. I might have to save my bow through this, you know. So I look at it, and then I give it a try with the rhythm and bowings. Usually what I like to say is the bowings and approximate rhythm. It would sound something like this. And this essentially gives me time to make my shifts and to make sure I'm doing it all correctly. And again, as you do it a few times, after that, if you feel like you've got it without getting stuck, you can go on to the next step. So the next step is metronome work. So now basically we're making sure that we can play it not just with our own rhythm, approximately longer and shorter notes, but with the exact rhythm. Metronome will not wait for us. If I wanted to take a little bit of time on this shift, which is a little bit difficult, the metronome will not wait for me. So I will be giving you guys metronome markings for this, all the movements of these pieces. They all have different, they'll have different metronome speeds. But essentially what you can do when you're working on a piece is what you want to find is a working tempo. In other words, maybe not full tempo, but a working tempo. And to do that, listen to the recording, find what tempo is the metronome, and maybe go to 80% of that. If it's a very slow piece, then maybe you don't need to go to 80% of that. But for this movement, it is quarter note equals, I'm going to say 50. Quarter note equals 50. So let's say I learned the notes, I learned the rhythm and bowings. My next step is to pull the metronome here, just to see if I'm close. You know, I don't want to turn on the metronome and find out like, whoa, that's much faster. You know, so I'm going to turn it on to see if it's close. And if it's much faster, then I'll maybe turn the metronome back off and try to play it approximately at that tempo and then try again with the metronome. So here we go. Here's 50. And this seems pretty close to where I was at. I'm going to try it with the metronome now. So once you have that down and you feel like you can keep up with the metronome just fine, you're fitting your shifts in just fine, then you're ready to move on to the last step. And this is important because you would think that, well, how is memorization like a part of what you're actually playing? Well, you'll find that if you are glued to the music, like if you're just watching the music, you're really not listening to your playing. So if we want to get to this stuff, to the quality things, we want to be able to play by memory. So to practice playing by memory, fairly simple. Let's say I've been practicing this section. I probably played it way more times than that if I'm trying to learn it, right? So I played many times just the notes, and many times rhythm and bowings, and many times with the metronome. Finally learned it. If you've played it a bunch of times, you might have it already memorized, so just turn away and try it by memory. If you get part of the way through, and you get stuck, try it again with the music. And so on, go all the way through. Remind yourself of how it goes with the music. Try it again by memory. Once you get it by memory, you then have it memorized. Some sections you will memorize after one try because you've just done it so many times, you already know it. Other sections, maybe the first steps were really easy. You haven't played it very many times. It may take you many times to memorize it. Sometimes it's the ones with actually repeated patterns. You're like, oh great, it's just this thing repeats a few times. And then it's tricky, you forget how many times it repeats. Those are the hardest to memorize sometimes. Any of these steps may throw you off depending on the difficulty of the piece. Maybe the notes are easy, the rhythm and bowings are easy, but getting it with the metronome is very difficult. It just depends on what kind of section you're working on. So for the first lesson, I'm going to assign you guys to work on the first 4 sections of this piece. Let me mark them off here. Now, one last thing as you're working through these. The general principle is do not add to your material load. Material is just like how much music you're playing until what you are working on is really good. If you're trying to build a structure, which essentially what a large piece is, and one of the foundational levels is weak, and you put something on top of it, it will collapse. And this will also happen with this piece. So, you know, if on your first day you're really excited to get to all these other sections and it takes everything you got to learn in the first A1 section, stop there. If you feel like your A1 section is learned and you got some gas in the tank, you can practice a little bit more, then go on to A2. And in general, as you're going through these lessons, if you need to tell your, your teacher that you're maybe not keeping up, that's fine. We'll make accommodations for that, but don't bring like two good sections and then two poorly learned sections. Learn it well, and you'll still be able to keep up with the class. Let me see, did I miss anything? I don't think so. All right, next week we will take a look at the next few sections. We'll just have a little bit more advanced fingering work, and we will actually take a look at quality as well. All right, see you guys then.